G'day, fans, and welcome back to another exciting and planned episode of good old talk and stuff, as opposed to last week, which was just a complete bit of schmozzling. Today, we're actually back for a proper show. Mr. Aaron is back. It is party. We've got lots to talk about. Mr. Aaron, how you going, old son?
First, I've got to point out when we first went live, it said there were 2 viewers, and then it dropped instantly to 0 as soon as it came on, which is always refreshing to see. Secondly, I like to add some schmozzle every single time we broadcast. And thirdly, I've had a busy day. The weather doesn't know what it wants to do. Hot today, air conditioning on, pouring of rain as well. Good old Melbourne.
Yes, it is actually. So it is actually meant to be raining outside at the moment, which is very good. There's big storms coming. What can I say? A storm is coming, Annie. That's exactly right. Now, for those who aren't aware, last week there was a bit of dicking around going on where you and I just put on a show that was completely no frills, no pictures, no nothing. It was just us talking. It was originally scheduled, then cancelled, then it went ahead. So for those people who have no idea what all that was about, at least this time we're back with some proper stuffs.
Well,
Dags, very groovy.
One of us was embarrassingly wearing the same clothes.
It's the uniform. I was like, I don't want to have to be in your situation and go, what am I going to wear today? So someone is here to make us look good, and it's clearly not me. So that's the most important thing. Very groovy. Here we go. Karan has said, "G'day, dudes. Got a Star Trek sushi set from." Oh, he bought that, did he? The Enterprise sushi thing.
Oh, that was very unique, very interesting item. I've never seen it before. I've seen the pizza wheel. I've never seen the Star Trek sushi server.
Oh, did it look any different? I mean, it was in the box, but I mean, the pizza wheel, the primary hole cuts the pizzas. But what does the sushi one look like? Do you know? Because it was still.
I don't know. I didn't. Well, it kind of looked like the Enterprise, and it was mounted on a wooden base for presenting sushi. So for it, like, it'd be the type of thing that Colin, in charge of the Star Trek Club's sort of finances, could probably buy 30 of them and then take them to a sushi restaurant and say, we want all our sushi served on this for the meeting.
Yeah, and of course, because they serve them so quickly, of course, they've got to go whoosh every time they do that. Now, this one is, I'm going to kick this off, okay, because we've got a lot to cover off. This one is probably going to be a tad controversial. It is, and it isn't. So yesterday, the other half and I are sitting there, because our taste in TV shows and movies are a little different, but she said to me, Lynn, that she only got halfway through The Acolyte, right? And I thought, oh, Christ, I have to watch this again. So, I mean, I, at the time, didn't really think that much of it, but I watched the last 4 episodes of The Acolyte again. And I got to say, all things being equal, it really wasn't that bad, right? So, I mean, it's not the perfect show, by all means, a Star Wars show. There's a few things that didn't work, but its concepts and its ideas really worked well enough to make it, a tick in the box, right? Because to me, I think we both agree, the Book of Boba Fett as a Star Wars series was pretty terrible, right? But when you look at The Acolyte, you take away all the controversy surrounding it. It really wasn't such a bad show. And I thought, in retrospect, it would have been interesting to see how the story continued, how they gone to season 2. So,
what that makes me think is, if you watch The Acolyte twice, it's so bad it drives you insane.
It wasn't that bad, and there were some parts of it I go, you know what, that was actually better than I remember it. So
I think the thing with The Acolyte, I didn't hate it, I just didn't think it was great. I think, and the thing I don't like is mediocrity in Star Wars. It should all be fantastic.
Yeah, look, I totally agree with you. So it's certainly no Andor by any stretch, but it certainly wasn't as horrendous as what a lot of people made it out to be. I like this one from Russell. Did you watch The Echo or The Light? Yes, exactly right. But
it was like it was light on action. While we're on Star Wars, this will come up later. Usually, what's going on in the shop? We got a guy came in with a box of Star Wars carded figures. We got 100. Vintage collection figures. Now they're the ones that look like the old retro ones, but they're new figures. But it's hard to imagine that people are dumping 100 of these. They're up to about nearly 400 now. They only made 96 of the original figures. So there's subsets of the new stuff, and there's 5 times as many as the originals now. It's crazy.
I can't imagine trying to explain to somebody, oh, this is the vintage. These are vintage figures, but they're not vintage figures, even though it says vintage on the back. You go, no. There's vintage and there's vintage.
Well, there's vintage and there's the retro collection. And in this one, we got the vintage and the retro of the same figures, and the retro collection just has fake wear on the card, and the figure looks shitty because it's not molded as well. It looks like it's the old stuff. So there are subsets of the vintage collection.
You know, the only solution to the only response to that is, Ken Bruce has gone mad, Ken Bruce has gone mad, Ken Bruce has gone mad.
And now his insane inbred cousin Chad is running the show.
Indeed, has actually gone completely Burko. Anyway, vintage figures that aren't vintage figures, make of that what you will. Now, because we haven't actually done a proper show for 2 weeks, I've been keeping an eye on what's been going on around the traps. A few pictures have popped up. I like grabbing the odd one from time to time. This one came across the desk recently, and I thought I had a bit of a laugh at this, right? So it's actually a product called Soylent Plant-Based Nutrition Shake. And of course, the gag was, yeah, right. If you've ever seen Soylent Green, that nutrition shake is not plant-based.
It's all good until you like find a testicle floating in your milkshake, isn't it?
It's like a tea bag. The worst part is if you recognise it. Oh, that looks like Uncle John's.
It's like, I don't know. When I was a kid, I got strawberry jam. If you found a full strawberry in your strawberry jam, you're doing pretty well. If you find something like that in your Soylent shake, it's actually not that enticing, is it?
Gosh, there's a lot of bad jokes that can come out of what you just said a moment ago. I tell you what, that'll test you, the faithful. What can I say? Russell Thursday is Soylent Green Day. Yes, I thought it was just funny. So yeah, Soylent Corporation making what they call nutrition-based shakes.
Well,
yes, exactly
that one,
right.
If Soylent Green is people, what is Soylent Brown?
Indeed. Let us move on, shall we? Because we are heading into. Hang on, what was I saying? But it's made of nuts. The insane asylum is surprisingly empty. Yes, exactly right. It's because both of us are on a day pass. Yes.
Well, Soylent Brown does taste surprisingly nutty.
It does. It's a bit nutty. It's those crunchy bits you got to be wary of. Anyway, let us move on because we're heading into very dark and dodgy territory here. Guess what, fans? We have to, and it's a shame Greg hasn't turned up yet, I don't think. We actually have a bit of a chat about the old Doctor Who, but of course, if we're going to talk about the old Doctor Who, we have to play this.
Doctor Who! Hey! The TARDIS! Doctor Who! Hey! The TARDIS!
Oh, that is just too good for me. And of course, yes, so apparently Ncuti Gatwa is coming back for season 3 of the Doctor Who. Everybody was talking about it in the past week or two around the place. I know you've been keeping tabs on what's going on. What we're going to say?
I'm flying in the face of what the BBC is saying. I'm saying there ain't no season 3 and Ncuti's gone. So even though it kind of officially got announced and then retracted really fast, here is what I can say of what I've been hearing allegedly. I've got to put in that allegedly just in case anyone sues me. Disney has pulled out of Doctor Who. They want to wait. Originally, they told Russell T Davies they were waiting till the Christmas special if they were going to, pull the trigger on doing Series 3 with them. Russell T Davies, in the meantime, went behind Disney's back to the BBC saying, if Disney don't do Doctor Who, don't put funding in, are we still going to make Doctor Who? And the BBC said, yes, we probably will still be doing Doctor Who, even if we've not got the mouse money coming in. And so Disney then said, after they said they were waiting till January to make a decision, we want to see what happens when season 2 comes out before we make a decision in May. But the series was booked in January to start filming. So that kind of puts a lot of pressure on them. And because the BBC had said to Russell T Davies, we're going to go ahead and make Doctor Who even without Disney, Russell T Davies is like, okay, we're going to go and we're going to start without Disney. Except he didn't get, as far as I understand, he didn't get the nod from the BBC about that. And Ncuti said on Graham Norton, and we're starting filming Series 3. And that was what people at the live taping of the show saw. But when it went to air, they edited all of that out and they said, and the next thing is basically the Christmas special. And they didn't talk about Series 3 because I heard that the BBC said, no, hang on, we probably will go ahead and make Doctor Who without Disney, but we want to wait and see if Disney actually say yes or no before we go ahead and start it without them. And the other thing is, I've heard when it comes back, it's not going to be Ncuti who's the Doctor anyway. So that could be, totally wrong, but that's what I've been hearing for a long time. from very well-placed people in the Disney side of things, actually, because they kind of know what's going on as well as what's going on in the BBC. That is as much as I can say, but we will see who's right, me or the BBC.
It's funny, right? Because I wasn't expecting you to give me this big, long thing. I was just going to say, do you like the idea of it? Yes or no? And that would have been yes, no. Okay, we move on.
Well,
suddenly we got all the hot goss. I love it.
Well, I did speak to Dags about this in the week, and I actually spoke to my friend in America and said, how much can I say? And he's like, well, as long as you're not naming names and you just say allegedly and it's a rumor, that's fine. So there we go.
Yeah, because I just heard whispers in the wind. Because as people know, I don't really give a rat's ass either way. Someone said, "Oh, he's back for season 3." I go, "Oh, really?" So I was just going to say, "What do you reckon, dude? Is that a good idea or not?" So, but anyway, we got a bit more out of that. We got a bit more meat off the bone than was originally planned. What can I say? Well done, dude.
Well,
see, I just set you on your path, and it's just off. He's gone. It's like, okay, we'll just let him get. This is you. We'll just let him go.
I will say, do I like the idea of him coming back? He is coming back. We've got series 2. If you ask me at the end of series 2, I might have a different opinion. But we know we've got at least a Christmas special and another series with the 15th Doctor, Ncuti Gatwa. How that goes, I'm sure we'll review it on DNA Reviews.
Indeed. Yes, I can barely wait. Yes, I agree with you, Mark. No short answers from Aaron. Yes, exactly right. But he's the lad with all the goss. So there you go. All right, now I'm going to move on. This only occurred today, right? And I'm curious to get... So people who are watching, I actually want their feedback. You may have actually seen this. This popped up on Facebook, of all places. It's an ad for something called Survey World. We are looking for men who like sci-fi movies. So if they're asking about males liking sci-fi movies, it's probably got something to do with females in sci-fi movies, as it were. And it's a survey thing that you can sign up for and you can get paid for it and blah. At the bottom there, on the bottom right, it says, all men who love sci-fi movies participate today. Has anybody seen this? Has anybody signed up for it? And does anybody know what they're asking regarding men who love sci-fi movies? What about you, dude? Have you seen this yet?
It's interesting. I keep getting, do you like Asian women coming up in my feed? But that's probably a different thing. I do get this. Do you like, what I get a lot is, do you like sci-fi movies? Do you like horror movies? Have you got an original idea you would like to turn into a Netflix series? I think a lot of these have got to be scams. I don't know. I've never clicked on it. But the good thing is, if you're Joe or you're Christy and you're watching, you can just pretend to be a man and you can still participate in these surveys, can't you?
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. I mean, Survey World apparently is a genuine thing. But I thought this was just really interesting. And I was curious to find out more, but I thought I don't want to go down that path until someone else has said, yep, I've done this. I know what the questions are. I know what it's all about. But no one's actually responded that they have signed up or that they've even seen it. So, yeah, I was just really bizarre. But I only just saw this today. I have no idea where it's come from, and I'm just curious to know whether it's legitimate or not.
Do you know
why you need to be a sci-fi fan as a bloke? Yeah, what?
Do you know who they don't want? They don't want MPS because he can't even win a trivia quiz.
He can't, exactly right. So, especially when it's about superheroes, and of course, he's the bee's knees of superhero quizzes until he loses one, which is what happened on a cruise ship recently. Yeah. Absolutely love it. Anyway, if between now and next week, if somebody does see that on their feed, signs up for it, can they give us some feedback as to what it was all about, whether it was worth it, whether it was just dodgy or whatever?
You probably sign up and you get the first email. I'll be your coordinator, Ronnie.
Yeah, actually, there's a question here. Somebody mentioned, is this run by Ronnie? For those who have no idea what the joke is, that was from my previous series that we used to do, Rip It Off the Card. But yeah, anyway, so make of that what you will. So, but clearly, Facebook knew that I'm obviously a male and I'm obviously a sci-fi fan because it popped up for me a couple of times, and I go, okay, fair enough. And just finally, I just want to chuck this one in. Once again, you see some pictures. There's obviously a lot of very crafty people out there in the world who do some really, really fascinating things regarding sci-fi stuffs. This one I saw a couple of weeks ago, and I thought, oh, this is very, very groovy. And you got to check this out. It's face hugger wine glasses. Oh, dude, how gross is that?
Well, that should probably be on the table at the Japanese restaurant with the Star Trek sushi plate, shouldn't it?
It probably could. How good does that look? I mean, the actual video shows the thing spinning around in 360, so it's hard to get proper stills from it. But I got to admit, That's pretty gruesome, pretty gritty, isn't
That's probably how they serve all the drinks in the Geiger bar in Switzerland.
it? Yeah, that might be actually. So, absolutely love it. I thought that was just a really, really cool. It's spectacular to look at, and I love the idea that the tail makes up the stalk, which is kind of cool.
It looks really fragile, and the worst thing, if you actually break it, it just causes an acid leak to go all the way through.
So make sure your restaurant isn't above some other stores, like if it's on the top of the Eiffel Tower, because it'll just burn its all the way through. And you go, oopsies. So speaking of oopsies, which I'm not really, now this is something that you fans out there are going to be going completely and absolutely burko over. We're going to be doing a new segment starting from next week, okay? And I'll tell you what, it is going to be the most exciting thing that you've never seen, because it's not that exciting. But it's one of Aaron's ideas. We're doing a thing called Toy Stories. Mr. Aaron, do the plug. What is Toy Stories all about?
So the one thing I noticed when we do a off-the-cuff show, we get all these questions about different things. And being a toy dealer, I have got the same questions over and over and over. What's the most expensive thing you've ever had? What's your oldest collectible? What's your first collectible? What's the best deal you've had? What's the best thing you've done at a garage sale? So do you know what? I'm going to start formally sharing those stories in this little family that we have here. And you can see Dags and I have even cosplayed to make the title card for this. And apparently he gave me a Woody when I gave him a Buzz or something like that. So yeah, Indeed. From next week, it's only going to be short little segments. But if you've got any questions you'd like to know about my collecting career, message us or ask us in person, and we'll work them in sometime.
Karan said, can't wait for Toy Stories. I bought Dicko for $5 and got change. Oh, that's a bit rough, eh? They don't hand out coins that small anymore, Mr. Karan, but there you go. Very, very groovy. So anyway, that's Toy Stories next week. We've already got a segment worked out regarding what we're going to be discussing. It's mostly Aaron doing all the talking about some, to hopefully answer the questions that you guys always ask us, which is very, very groovy. So loving it. What do you reckon, dude?
I love talking about myself, don't I?
Well, someone is supposed to. Russell said, where's Greg? He's missing all this. I know. I don't know where he is, but I can tell you where he isn't. One thing that did get announced recently, and it's one of the things that we're going to be chatting about tonight, is the Star Wars Saga Museum. Now, there's a whole bunch of videos doing the rounds regarding this. Now, have you seen this at all or no? I know what it's about, but I'm asking you. Do you know what this is about?
It's been pretty big news, because I think this is something probably been coming for a long time. It might even be, I don't know if you know the history of George Lucas. He's trying to build a museum of modern art, and a lot of cities have said, yes, we want it here. And then when he says, oh, it's not a museum of Star Wars, it's actually real modern American art, because he has quite a collection. They're like, oh no, well, we don't want that then. So if there's enough cities and museums saying, we'll give you tax breaks and we'll put money into it to make a Star Wars museum, the logical thing is to make a Star Wars museum. So this is it. And I can see it being quite a big tourist attraction for that city.
So for those who haven't seen it, there's a video doing the rounds. So one of the biggest museums, if you want, private museums, is Rancho Obi-Wan, which you saw Steve Sansweet there a moment ago. Now, clearly, some people are looking at the long-term viability of Rancho Obi-Wan. And as it turns out, that Rancho Obi-Wan, in collaboration with 3 other major collectors of Star Wars in the US, and I've got them written down at the end of the video, are looking at putting together an official Star Wars museum, which is primarily got to do with all the collectibles and the props and whatever else. So I did some reading today as to what it's all about. So they've announced it. They'll be probably doing some crowdfunding or Kickstartering or funding, searching, whatever you want to call it. They're looking for $2 million to do a study as to which city this thing is going to go into. So what I think is happening is that the 4 groups are getting together to think of the long-term viability of producing an official museum for Star Wars. Apparently there's 1.3 million items or whatever between the 4 groups, and they're going to do an official one. So and I think this is all to do with the long-term future, covering the whole saga from all the 9 movies and the TV series and whatever else, and of course whatever's coming in the future. And so there's a video that's been released for it, and this one obviously came from YouTube, so people can check it out if they want. This only got announced a few days ago, And I thought, well, if it does go ahead, because at the moment it's just in concept stage, that has the potential of being massive. So what do you reckon, dude?
Well, it's a disappointment for people waiting for Sand Street to pass away and then the biggest Hakes auction of merchandise ever. But I look on the upside, I think it's really great. In some respects, I'd rather go and see a massive museum of merchandise like this collated by fans literally over their entire lifetime, over some of the other stuff that's done the rounds a few times, because I like merchandise and I think, pop culture can often be seen most directly by how it's been sold to the public. So it's an area of Star Wars that is massive, bigger than any other franchise ever, has a lot of people who will be interested. I mean, if you look at the celebrations and things like that, a lot of people go just to get the merchandise and things like that. So I think it will be a success. And really, they're looking for, what, 2 million? All they have to do is sell 4 of Steve Sansweet's rocket firing Boba Fett prototypes, and they've got the money right there. So
yeah, well,
I
yes,
think it'll happen.
go.
I think it'll happen.
Well, I think it will too, and it's kind of funny because a couple of weeks ago we showed a Star Trek sort of shop that was in New York, I think, and I think the potential for this thing to be enormous in scale, and of course it will generate massive amounts of revenue, not only for the museum but no doubt for the merchandising they produce for it as well. Because Rancho Obi-Wan, for those who don't know, is in San Francisco, but not in the city. It's actually out near Petaluma, which is right across the Golden Gate Bridge and like a couple of hours away. It's like a rural town. So I think they're looking at something a little bit more closer to home, for which American city goes for it. And you would assume that they're going to be like lining up to say, yeah, we'll find you a decent venue, and it'll probably be a pilgrimage for a lot of people, just like going to Galaxy's Edge is at the moment.
Just like coming to Aaron's Collectibles, yeah.
A little bit. So it's just funny how, like, I thought the timing of this was interesting because here in Melbourne, of course, we're getting the Fan Strike Back exhibition next month, and we'll talk about that as we get closer to it. And then this thing popped up, and I go, "Oh, what's this?" And clearly everybody's thinking about, and mortality is a thing, and I guess a lot of people who will be big collectors are saying, "Well, what is going to happen 10 years from now, 20 years, 30 years?" Because the saga or the franchise is going to keep going. What's going to happen to all this stuff? And I guess this is the way of ensuring its longevity. So it's impressive to say the least. So I've got to say it's very, very groovy. And I got it here finally. The collecting groups. So it's obviously Rancho Obi-Wan, Gus Lopez, who does actually work for Lucasfilm, Boba Cabana, which have you ever heard of these groups?
I have.
Smithsonian. Yeah, go on. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, they're all big collectors groups. They're the oldest sort of collectors in the game that sort of have become more than fans and worked in the industry. Things like that. So they are all well-known names, and they would have the biggest collection. Between them, they'd have pretty much everything you could ever imagine that was released. I like how Colin said, like, put it in Frankston. Well, that is the ice planet, isn't it?
Yeah, I can't see that happening. So wherever it's going to go, it's clearly going to be set up and be a permanent setup, which means obviously the Rancho Obi-Wan will close down or migrate. I mean, you can't even begin to imagine just shipping all that stuff to somewhere else in America with all the other collections and setting it all up. I guess, in the years to come, let's assuming it goes ahead in a couple of years. So we're 2024. So by 2027 or 8, you and I will probably have to do a pilgrimage over there, no doubt, with a lot of people. If they're doing celebrations in the same city, you can imagine they'll just incorporate it as one big thing. And from what I've seen, because I've been to Steve Sansweet's place twice, once as Rancho Obi-Wan and also back in 1993, it's overwhelming. And that's the hard part with a lot of stuff you can have. And your store's a bit like this, actually, where you can have so much in there that when people come in, they go, I can't process it all. It's just too much. And so whether it's a case of shove it all in and let just people figure it out for themselves, or they say, no, we'll cut it down a little bit to make it a bit more so you can consume it, if that makes sense.
Well, the one thing, and I have done this a couple of times, moving a collection is horrible, because that's when it's sitting there and on display, it's fine. But when you move stuff, it breaks. Can you imagine moving the volume of Rancho Obi-Wan? I thought that was a chicken farm converted into a museum, I think. So that gives you the idea of scale, how large it actually is. and who do you trust to move it? Because you can't just get, your average movers who just chuck all the boxes in a van. It has to be curated like a museum. And then who do you get to display it all and the layout and stuff? I can imagine it quite a logistical, confusing operation.
Yeah, but it would definitely be well worth doing. We're good to see Joe's joined us. Bar, give me a Batman museum. Yeah, I had my time in the sun. No, you know what? I don't know if think even a Batman, because there are big Batman collectors in the world, obviously, and I don't know if a Batman museum would really cut it. Having said that, as we now know, Batman does have a star on the Walk of Fame, so we'll have to wait and see.
It's interesting.
But, yes,
I've been in the collector's game so long. You see peaks and troughs of different franchises, and Star Wars was in a bit of a lull. You go back before Disney took it over. And Batman was the biggest franchise. Everything we got from Batman, we would sell. People came in looking for Batman. That was right in the middle of the Christian Bale movies. And then Marvel, what happened? Basically, Disney announced they were making Star Wars. And even though there was no new product, there was so much excitement. Star Wars went back to the number one selling franchise. And then Marvel, in the meantime, moved in and Spider-Man and all of that took over from Batman. So you see it sort of peaking and troughing. Star Wars does always seem to be the one that comes back and floats to the surface, though.
Indeed. Marcus said he moved his Who cave. He did it all by himself. He can only blame himself for breaks. Don't want to move again because it took months to get my collection set up again. Yeah, exactly right. That's why I think if they move this thing to a new location, it's going to be a permanent exhibition.
We have our first call-in viewer, Dags. Hold on a second. Hey, Tennille, you're live on air. What question did you have for the show tonight? No question? Okay, I'll see you soon, honey. Bye.
Speak. I'm thinking, where are we going with that? What was that? Did she actually ring you while you were on the show?
I always say, don't call. I said, if you call, I'm going to put you live on air, but she was too shy.
Oh,
there you go. Sorry about that, guys.
Oh, don't apologize. I was thinking, it's like she could have said, "Yeah, what are you making for dinner?" And you go, "Well, if I had a sushi friggin' enterprise thing, I could make some sushi." But friggin' Karan bought it because he's an asshole. Unbelievable. Chrissy said Star Wars floats at the top because it is a cream of fandoms. Yeah, you would say that. So yes, I tend to agree. So very, very, very groovy. So anyway, the Star Wars Museum. Another thing to add to the list of things to visit next time you're in America. Okay, you go to Galaxy's Edge. You go to Celebration, you go to this museum thing, and it would be very, very groovy for those who want to see stuff. But of course, it all depends on what you want to look at, because in the end, you can walk along and go, well, I just want to see props or toys from 1980 backwards. Anything after the 90s, I couldn't give a rat's bum about. So like all things, that only some of it will actually interest certain people, I would suspect. What do you reckon, dude?
I think most people who would be attracted to a museum like that, it's like all museums. You might go in to the gallery to see the exhibition that's traveling around, but you go through the whole museum anyway because you have that general interest. So I think it's a good thing. I like we were saying, and Christy was saying, Star Wars is the cream of fandoms. It will get enough people through. If you did a Marvel celebration or a DC celebration, I could see one or two running really well, but then after that, I think the novelty would be gone. Where Star Wars, you have different generations and different guests, and you've got different shows coming along. So I think they are onto something there. And you know what? Half of the Star Wars fan community is into the merchandise, aren't they?
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. That's why I said, like, you got the Fan Strike Back appearing here next month, which is a very groovy. All right, so we're going to move away from Star Wars because it's now time for something very, very interesting, and it's now time for this particular segment.
A question.
All right, so I'm going to ask my lad a question. He doesn't know what it is, and this one I thought is an interesting one. The question for you, dude, is quite simply, what made Star Trek: The Next Generation such a good show?
That is an interesting question, and I think you would have to go probably 70% the writing, 30% the cast. Maybe there's some room in there for other things like special effects and stuff. The thing that people tend to forget about Star Trek: The Next Generation, it wasn't really wanted by the fans when they announced it. The movies were still going, and they were saying, well, we've still got the original cast. It's actually disrespectful to recast the Enterprise. We don't want a new Enterprise. We don't want a new crew. like bring the originals back for a TV series if you really want to do it and just pay them more. And the first season, you know, Star Trek as Next Generation as a whole is looked back fondly. The first season was packed with duds and it wasn't great, to the point where when they screened it here, they basically showed the first episode and jumped to the last 2 episodes to get through season 1 because it was recognized as not a great show. And then season 2 was also skipped because I think the fan wisdom is that Star Trek Next Generation gets really, really, really good from season 3 onwards. So what makes it good, I think, was the writing definitely upped. And what was really lucky was when we had season 1 and 2, even though they weren't the best, there's a couple of good episodes, but, you know, I don't rewatch that era very much. At least doing 1 and 2 gave the writers and the cast and crew time to settle in and work out how to get into their stride, what worked, what didn't work, what story arcs they wanted to do. So when you look at the original Star Trek, they were trying to cancel it by that time, and the show was winding down, where really we got 7 years where it was only just sort of ramping up by series 3 and series 4. Imagine if it had had the life of the original Star Trek, 4 years, and then gone into syndication and it ended. It wouldn't be as fondly remembered. But for the question, I would say it's always the writing and the stories that are the backbone of any show. If you've got good actors, you can, you know, make that even better. And then you've got the special effects and visuals and music and things like that. And a lot of care and a lot of love was put into making this good because they really wanted it to succeed. But I think we had a couple of years to get to the point where, okay, they started pumping out classics.
So just to clarify, so with the original series, it got cancelled after the first 2 seasons. The letter writing campaign brought it back for the 3rd season. So history could have repeated itself by the end of the 2nd season and Next Generation. They could have said, no, this is complete tripe, cut it off, not knowing that in the future how it was all going to turn out. So just to clarify that. Karan's just asked, did the Next Gen movies do well? The alternate ones did. So Generations, kind of not really, which is a bit like the motion picture, but First Contact was a massive success, and then it sort of petered its way through there.
The thing I'd have to say, I love the original Star Trek and I love Next Generation. You could ask me on different days of the week which one was a better series, and sometimes I'd say the original and sometimes I'd say Next Generation. But if there were only 3 series of Next Generation, I'd probably always go with the original Star Trek.
So the interesting thing, and the reason why I brought it up, is, and you're completely correct, because I was actually in Star Trek fandom at the time, and there was a lot of angst regarding the when the series was first announced. You know, they got a new captain and a new ship and a new crew, new uniforms, blah, 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 blah. And the show did stumble its way through its first season. In retrospect, when people look back upon it, they go, oh, yeah, the first and second seasons were pretty horrible. Remembering in the second season, there was the writer's strike as well, which definitely didn't help. But there were a couple of little gems in there. And you could easily say, oh, this show is not going to go anywhere. But once you got to the 3rd season and went onwards, it is the flagship show of Star Trek by a long shot. And even today, it's the one that everybody really remembers more than anything else. And in the fan community, there were people who came into the community from Star Trek who said, I didn't even watch the original series. They were obviously a lot younger. It wasn't their thing. Next Gen was their thing, was their series, and they really dialed into it. And to be fair, and I agree with you, the series finished at season 7, and they do that because then they've got to renegotiate all the actors' prices, which of course they're all going to ask for pay rises. So they just said, okay, we're going to wrap it up at season 7. So you've got 4 years where the show was just untouchable. It was just that good. And it's interesting to look at it retrospectively because those episodes from season 3 onwards are still excellent even today, regardless of everything that came after it, even stuff that's still being produced today. Next Gen is the show that people turn to. And it's really interesting. So that's why I thought I'd bring the question up. It's like, what made it so good? Now, I agree with you. The writing had something to do with it. Absolutely. Just the way that it crafted all of its characters and the stories for all the characters, something about it just ticked all these boxes. So if the original series never existed, Star Trek would still be in a strong position because of Next Generation.
Well, the thing is, I think Paramount knew that they were trying to get it right, and they knew that the early series weren't as good as they could be, because before the internet and all of that, which is basically where Next Generation was. It wasn't anyone I knew who had the internet back then. The only way you could get hold of these things was the video releases. They weren't even shown on television for a couple of years. I think they were trying to maximize the profit and work out who was going to buy it and everything. And I do remember even the videos skipped through. They released them in order for a while, and then they skipped through to Series 3. And I remember, like, why have they done this? And it was The Measure of a Man and something else, 2 really good Season 3 episodes they skipped through. I watched that and I go, wow, this is really, really good. After like watching Series 1 and Series 2, and they went through.
Hang on, I'm just going to stop you. Well, can I cut you off? Measure of a Man was Season 1 or 2, one of those two. It was one of the rare highlights. Yeah,
definitely wasn't Series 1. Might have been Series 2. But anyway. So they released that. And they hadn't released all the others. And then they picked highlights, and I think that was really smart because it built up the fan base because they released all the good stories first. And then when they released the shite ones, people still borrowed them because they had got that fan base there. So it is interesting. It is one of the weirdest release I've ever seen of a TV series, where on TV they put it on at prime time and showed a couple, then it went to a graveyard shift and try and get a cult audience. And then when it got popular, it came back, and the video releases were at the video library. And when it got a big enough following, they started doing sell through. So you had to buy them before they were in the video library, kind of thing.
2 things. Season 2 for series, Season 2 for Measure of a Man. So what happened is they released it on videotape 5 years after it got released in the US. They got through all the first season, and then when it got to free-to-air TV, they said, well, the first season's been on video for a year. We'll just start with Season 2. So on free-to-air, it was just a really, really bad run. But only the general public saw that. All the fans had access to those tapes years before because of getting them from America. It's interesting because the show introduced a lot of different characters. It really did well regarding the Klingons and the Romulans and that entire story, including the Vulcans as well. And it was definitely one of those series that had one of the best final episodes, all good things. There's just so many different highlights that through that entire series that just have never been matched. And it really was lightning in a bottle, which is funny because there was an episode called Ship in a Bottle. And that it's a magic time to be a Star Trek fan. And of course, that's the reason why they went on to Deep Space Nine and Voyager. So
I was just going to say,
it was really, really good.
It had a lot to bear on its shoulders because the entire future of Star Trek would have been totally different if it had failed. And as you said, there was Deep Space Nine and Voyager and Enterprise and all the other stuff. And this is off the topic, but one of the things I really loved was, do you remember when it was all out and then Voyager was out and Deep Space Nine, and you could go into a video library and there was a Star Trek section. And because all the spines made up pictures, there was this amazing slab of almost Star Trek artwork. And people would go through and rent, all of them in order. And I mean, they must have made so much money out of that because Star Wars, the rentals, there were the 3 movies at the time. Star Trek, you've got the original series, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager. I mean, the video rentals, no wonder they made so much money and it did so well. You were saying from the Star Trek meetings, they hired out a basketball hall and they were filling it to watch Next Generation episodes bootlegged across from America.
Yeah, actually, I can personally say that I worked into a video store one time. They had all the DS9 episodes from number 1 right through to the last episode, and we just systematically hired them right through every single episode, which was very groovy. Got to chuck in one of these, which is always good to see. So, Rusky Babes fun factoid. Here we go. Series 2, Measure of Man, only got on air because Roddenberry got ill and writer Melinda Snodgrass sneaked it in, which is very cool. Collins also said the introduction of the Q continuum was a masterstroke. If you watch the pilot episode, Encounter at Farpoint, the Q thing, the whole thing makes no sense whatsoever. But when you get to the final episode, All Good Things makes complete sense. So yeah, they were like, it was magic. It really, really was. And there's a lot of stuff, and that's, I think, resonated with a lot of people, and that has continued on even to today, which is really, really groovy. And because I know when they first did the series, there was no arc story. They said, I think it was Gene Roddenberry's idea. He wanted every episode to be separate. That's why every title was that this. You could watch them in any order, and there was nothing that linked them all. But once you got to season 3 and you started putting the arcs underneath, and of course they introduced the Borg as well, Next Generation, which have become like the Daleks of the Star Trek world. And it's like it could do no wrong. And in the end, it didn't do any wrong. And it just finished at a high point, as you said. And they said, that's it, we're done. And it's like, what a way, leave them wanting more, as they say. And that's exactly what happened.
The conspiracy aliens never came back. They kind of did an arc towards that, and that didn't go anywhere.
Yeah, Gene Roddenberry wasn't happy about that. So for those who don't know, there was an alien race, I think was inhabiting humans and was going to take over the Federation. And it was in this episode Conspiracy. Yeah. And they actually shoot a dude and he falls apart and there's an alien inside him and all that. And Gene Roddenberry said, nope, not doing that. And that's the reason why that got poo-pooed. But if you loved your Klingons and your Romulans, all their entire, their cultural backstory got really brought out in Next Generation and it was just wonderful.
The other thing, you know, Q was a masterstroke, but in sci-fi pantheon of villains, the Borg have got to be one of the best villains ever. Yeah. They might have got overused over time, but when they originally came out, like when you got to the end of Series 3 and you had the normal people who liked television drama or watching Star Trek and going, oh my goodness, what's going to happen next? You know, that's happened with Doctor Who, with David Tennant, Matt Smith, and it's happened with Star Trek. Not many sci-fi shows break across into the general public conscience because there's always that barrier that it's for nerds or something. But what they did with Star Trek was they made it such good stories that it was accessible to anyone. And that was one of the other reasons I think Next Generation has a lot to be thanked for, because remember, if you look at the original Star Trek, that was, if you liked Star Trek, you were teased. You had the Mr. Spock helmet and people threw stones at you. But Next Generation, cool people actually started getting into Star Trek.
One other thing the Next Generation had going for it was a lot of different characters that everybody could dial into, whether it be male or female, and they all got really good backstories and character development, which when you look at the original series, didn't really happen that much. Aside from Spock, McCoy, and Kirk, the rest of them were kind of like B level, if you will, whereas in the Next Generation, they all got a lot of good treatment. Joe said, he was never a Trek fan, but he loved Next Generation, especially the holodeck episodes with Mark Twain. Yeah, the introduction of the holodeck just allowed him to just do all these wonderful things, and I guess that was just like it wrote itself, didn't it, really, when you think about it? So, yeah.
I can give you a clear example of how the writing pepped up, where Denise Crosby quit because her character was just, you know, underused and the writing was bad. And then she came back for Yesterday's Enterprise, one of my favorite episodes and best written episodes of the series. So clearly the pedigree of, you know, Series 3 onward really just, they went away with it. The other thing that's interesting, which doesn't happen much, they had an open script policy. So you and I could have sent scripts in and they read every single script that came in from fans, and a couple of them actually got made.
Yes, that is very, very true, actually. So, because fans usually have a better finger on the pulse than some of the official writers do, and they come up with some really, really good ideas. So, but yes, Next Generation is going to have a long life in the memory of people, and it's the show everybody compares Star Trek to. So whenever you're watching Strange New Worlds or Picard, or not Picard, because Picard links back to that series, but even like Section 31 when it comes out and whatever else in Discovery, people can say, oh yeah, Next Generation is still, it is the flagship show, even though there's a lot of reference for the original series, which is, you know, obviously richly well deserved. But in terms of just good quality television, Next Generation, all 4 years of it, and that's a couple of hundred, it's like 27 episodes a season, so there's a couple of hundred episodes to get through, or 100 episodes or whatever it is. That's some good TV watching there, which is very, very cool. Any final words on the old Trek of Next Generation, dude? Go for it.
No, it is one of those things, though. If I can't think of anything to watch, the whole Next Generation's up on Netflix, and I will go through and you can watch some of your favorite episodes, and I find that they hold up really well.
Totally agree with you. It's a shame they weren't done in high def and widescreen, but you can't have everything. Remember last time we did this, I said to you that we're actually doing getting some of our question without warnings and putting them together as separate videos. The one that came out a couple of days ago was that one. What is the ultimate Star Wars collectible? So if you happen to go to YouTube and check that out, you can see what we had to say about that. I think that episode was about 4 or 5 months ago. Which is particularly cool. So you can have a look and see what our thoughts were. Now, Mr. Aaron, this is a very, very groovy bit. So when we were on last week in our Just Make It Up As We Go Along episode, this message popped up from Mr. Russell, right? He said he will plug his newest upload scans from the 70s and 80s Starbursts. And that actually brings us and this, I've got to thank Russell for this, remembering Starburst, the magazine, which got released in 1977 in England, and believe it or not, is still going. Okay, so it's actually still in print today. They do an online version, and which I mean, the website is pretty basic, but they still do a print version, and its competitor Starlog, which started the year before, finished like back in 2009. So I'm just going to flick through a couple of pictures, but Starburst, the English sci-fi mag, how cool was this? Russell's probably going to have a fair bit to say about this, but what are your thoughts about good old Starburst, mate?
Well, I love old magazines from the time. We did an episode of Rip It Off the Card with Starlog, and we did a whole section on that. So I love this. What I have said many times before, the magazine section in Minotaur books was like the internet is today. Everyone would come in and see the air freighted, only 2 weeks old magazines come through with all the latest information, all the latest gossip. And Starlog and Starburst were, they'd have the reading copies that everyone snagged and looked through, and then all the other ones were sealed, were the two that I always gravitated to. And maybe I'd got subscriptions of Doctor Who magazine and TV Zone, but Fangoria was another big one because I'm a bit of a horror person. But Starburst was always, to me, seemed a bit more quality than Starlog. I always thought the articles were written in a bit more depth, and they seemed to have a more broad view of science fiction. And that's probably because I think Starlog mainly concentrated on American stuff, where they did have a lot of Space 1999 in Starlog, actually, whereas Starburst, because they were European, you'd get all these interesting articles on the Keep and all these European movies that you'd never heard of, and the American stuff as well. So it was a more holistic sci-fi magazine that had something for everyone.
So I asked Russell what the difference was primarily between Starburst and Starlog, and he's mentioned here Starburst covered UK, which Starlog didn't at first. Starlog was actually based around Star Trek, and that's where they cut their teeth. They wanted to do a Star Trek only magazine, but then they realised from a copyright perspective they couldn't do that, so they had to sort of branch out into other shows, and they did include some UK ones as they went along.
The amazing thing about the origin of Starlog is that is right. They wanted to do a one-off magazine, and because the copyright, they did it on everything, and it was such a success, it just became a monthly.
Yeah, and a lot of people have credited Starlog for creating effectively, strengthening the fandom, sci-fi fandom in the US. But I asked Russell, I said, okay, what's the difference between the two of them? Obviously, one's American, one's English. And it was a little bit like what you said. Starlog was pretty much like a very light and fluffy version of the magazine, where it's like, this is coming out, this is great, this is wonderful, this is this is that. Whereas Starburst tended to be a lot more critical, watching things with a bit more of a critical eye and being a little bit more forthright in their thoughts and opinions, which also meant negative opinions as well. So if I guess if the author or the writer saw something they didn't like, they would say they didn't like it. And as Russell mentioned, that that could kind of irk you, because you say, well, I really love this stuff, but here's you bagging the shit out of it. But clearly it was enough for people like him to keep buying the magazine, because, as you said, the quality of the workmanship put into it was actually really, really strong. And I did like the fact, because it was English, it did cover American things as well. So clearly it covered a lot of bases, which is very, very good.
Well, it had a lot of European stuff in that Starlog just didn't cover. And what Russell said is absolutely true. For some reason, Starlog did do a lot of Space 1999 and UFO. I think it was almost like they were looking for the new Star Trek, and that was the closest thing. Starlog would never have like 6-page articles on Blake 7 like Starburst had. It definitely had that sort of almost more fanzine thing, where you get the people who are writing really go into the detail, where Starlog is more of the like you said, a more popularist view, where everything is great and lots of glossy photos and stuff, but not as much meat on the bone as Starburst.
One thing I did forget to mention, and Russell did actually mention it here. This is the best way of putting it. Starburst, the first, was written by movie critics, not his sci-fi fans, which was good. So the guy who created Starburst, he was actually a bit of a mover and shaker in the film industry in England at the time, and he got wind of the fact that, because I thought, if the magazine's coming out in 1977, what came out in 77? Well, Star Wars did. He actually knew that Star Wars was coming. So he actually launched the magazine a few months before Star Wars got released, because he had contacts in the film industry. And the idea was that when the movie came out, his magazine was already established, remembering that Starlog had come out in 76. So that I thought makes a lot of sense to cash in on the latest craze as it occurs, because like what happened to Australia, the film comes out in America in May and we don't get it for months, and England was the same. So he had that long build up to get ready to promote the magazine. And of course, what happened after that? Of course, the whole sci-fi revolution kicked in, and the movies and the TV shows went completely burko. So suddenly there's like material everywhere. And of course, that gave his magazine the impetus to keep going and get bigger and bigger, which is, really, really groovy.
Yeah. So it is one of those things. All magazines were hit by the internet, and I guess the greatest period of magazines for me is the run through the 80s, because that's where you didn't have as much pop culture in just in the media. There wasn't even really as much social media as there is now. And I think the big thing why Starburst actually still is going where other ones have fallen away is because the writing quality is so good. It would attract people who aren't there just to look at the pictures and not to look, you can now Google anything and find the preview and watch it on YouTube and things like that. You can find YouTube commentaries on movies, but if you want an in-depth article, which is a bit more going into the ins and out, you still can't beat reading some of the magazines done by professional writers and reviewers.
Totally agree. Two things. Doc the Butcher, don't know who that is, but g'day, Doc. How you go? Stick around, you might learn something interesting. I agree. So with Starburst, they do podcasts and all the rest of it. Got different segments that they cover off. And so for those, a bit of backstory. So Russell's been scanning in all these Starbursts for historical purposes, which is absolutely fantastic. And when I was looking at these, and I agree with what you said, it's like, where are the days of the magazines? Because you do look at everything online on the screen. It really isn't the same at all. And the days of going to the magazine places like Minotaur and Alternate Worlds, where you'd have all the magazines all laid out and you'd be flicking through them. I had a mate of mine who once said he'd go to Minotaur, and as he's flicking through a Starlog, he's looking through all these other things. Wow, look at that. Look at that. Not even looking at the pages. And that's just all gone. That just doesn't exist anymore. But the fact that Starburst still exists in printed form, obviously in the UK, I don't know if it gets released anywhere here. That is all power to them, because it did go out of print and then they brought it back into print a couple of years later and it's still chugging away. So that is a really good testament, which is, really, really groovy. So absolutely love it.
Yeah, you can't really go past the magazines. Often when we get a retro magazine collection come through the shop, like that's the end of the productivity for the day for me, because I will end up thumbing through all these 80s magazines and rereading old articles and stuff. It is interesting, isn't it, that sometimes I'll see an article that I haven't seen in 20 or 30 years, and it's like meeting an old friend. You go and reread it because you remember fond memories of reading that article the first time, and I'd much rather go to an 80s magazine and read an old article on what people thought of Alien and what they thought were going to be in Aliens and stuff like that than some new magazine now reviewing Alien Romulus.
Well, that's a very good point, actually. I like this. A lot of his Starburst had Space Age book stickers on it. Yeah, Space Age Books was a sci-fi bookstore, more for literary fans and media fans, which was literally just up the road from Minotaur back in the day. Space Age is long gone now. Minotaur's still carrying on. But I went into a newsagent's recently, and this is only like last week. And as we discussed in this show a week or two ago, where the magazine section now is just a fraction of what it used to be. So if anybody can be the last man standing, so to speak, and if it ends up to be Starburst, then you've got to say that's actually a really good thing. But
give me 2 seconds.
Yeah. Oh, I've lost my dude. Oh, there you go. How about I just give myself the full screen, shall I? Anyway, the dude is buggered off. Never rely on the unreliable, as I like to say. Hang on, he's back, and I'm going to give him the full screen. There you go, dude. Oh, look at that.
I've still got my standing order from Space Age Books, and I'm still getting magazines from them every week. And this month I've got my sealed copies of Black Hole, Star Trek. I didn't know they'd closed. What's happening there?
What an idiot. Absolutely unbelievable. Marcus said the 80s when he used to run down the street and go and read all the mags and pick up my copy of Docky Who magazine well before the internet. Yes, the internet has a lot of benefits to it, but it's also killed a lot of traditions as well. Certainly hasn't killed as many trees, I guess you could argue. But yeah, and I agree with you, Russell. Yes, you're right. You can tell the phone number doesn't have the 9 on it, which got introduced in the mid-90s, which was kind of cool. So, but yeah, Starburst, all good on them. Absolutely fantastic. So for those who are friends of Russell on Facebook, you can see a lot of his scans. I mean, originally he was only going to do a handful, but he's gotten into the zone now, and he's just pumping all the stuff out, all for historical significance and archiving, which is a really, really groovy. So,
and the other thing I have to say, Russell does beautiful scans. It must take a lot of time, because a lot of scans you see are actually just photos of pages and hard to read. But he's actually really put a lot of work into doing some really top-notch scans, and the articles are readable, which is great.
Yeah, and it's the passion for the whole thing, which is very groovy. Michael, who's joined us here, Michael just lives up the road from me now. I remember going to the news agent, and there were 2 magazine shelves, 7-8 meters long. Yeah, that's all sort of gone now. And Russ, it should be known as the Docky Who monthly, weekly, and Blake 7 monthly were also spin-offs. Yeah, and once you got to the late 70s, and as I said, the science fiction revolution kicked in, things popped up everywhere, and there were magazines all over the place. I mean, I remember, I don't know if you remember this, I would go to like a place, and there'd be a magazine that you never even heard of, and you go, what's that? And it'll have like Boba Fett on the front or whatever, with a catchphrase, is he human? And you go, oh, I gotta buy that. And of course, like a few months later, that magazine's gone, it's defunct, and another one's just been produced to replace it. So
do you remember this one?
Back in the day, it was crazy. Yeah,
this is the greatest headline ever. Is Luke Skywalker Jesus?
And for people who were laughing, that's how they used to sell these things. A bit like how you in the newsagent, at the supermarket, you'll see the Woman's Weekly, and they'll have a ridiculous headline. You go, well, I'm going to buy it because I want to find out, even though it's completely just some dude has just invented a story. I think everybody would have magazines in their collections back in the day that were just one-offs, 1-2 issues tops, and then they just folded because because the market was too competitive. So
there was a magazine called I think it was Fantastique, and it gave the absolute rundown on what was going to happen in Return of the Jedi, and it is hilarious in how badly wrong it is. Did you know Boba Fett was going to be Luke's mother, because she was the only one that hadn't appeared, and he was in a helmet and had a fake voice and stuff. It was fantastic to read with hindsight about how wrong they got everything.
But the point was, we were reading them as kids, and we believed every word, because we thought these dudes are in the know. Mate, whatever they say has got to be true. Russell said he might look at doing some other mags. Worth noting that Starlog articles aren't worth looking at now. I can completely understand that. Greg has finally joined us after missing all the Docky Who chat from earlier on. So was Boba Fett? I know it was Boba Fett or Luke. It was supposed to be Jesus.
It was Luke. There was a big magazine, and it literally was, is Luke Skywalker Jesus? And you just thought, no.
Christy actually had, is the Luke Skywalker Jesus mag, and she disappeared during a move, but maybe it'll resurrect itself when you least expect it. That is, I love those magazines. They were just, I caught my eye. I used to believe everything I used to read in those things, which was amazing. Believe it or not, fans, that's, go on.
The other great one is where they announced that George Lucas was going to make the prequels, and one of the magazines confidently announced Macaulay Culkin is going to play the young Luke Skywalker.
Oh, really? I was going to say, well, no, that wouldn't have worked. Could have done an Anakin Skywalker. I mean, probably could have been better than Jake Lloyd, but anyway, we move on. That actually brings us to the end of the episode. So as always, if you haven't done so already, go to the Sci-Fi Zone socials and YouTube and blah, blah. As I said, those videos are on YouTube if you need to check them out. Otherwise, you got to go to Aaron's store, mate, for all of your exciting collectible needs, Mr. Aaron. And, of course, you're just bursting at the seams with new products.
I am. We've had 2 massive collections. I've been working upstairs 7 days a week, 25 hours a day, it seems like. But the fruits of my labor have now blossomed, and I'm filling up the cabinets with all these amazingly new 80s collectibles. So if you're into retro stuff, it's going to be a couple of good weeks in the shop.
When you said that, I thought, I hope you don't say the fruits of your loins, because that is just never a good thing. So very, very groovy. All right, fans, we are going to buzz off. A proper show back this week as opposed to the craziness of last week. We will be back next week. Toy Stories starts next week. We're going to be answering you the questions that you guys keep bugging the crap out of us or Aaron about, and it should be a bit of fun and gags. What do you reckon they do?
Just when you thought the show couldn't be any more disappointing, we bring in a new stuff.
It is our job to make people just shake their heads and go, why do I watch this rubbish every week? So there you go. All right, fans, party hard, rock on. And we'll see you all next week. Okay, ta-da for now.
Have a good night, guys. See you.